I knew the HOA was going to be a pain when they tried to fine me for having a canoe flipped over on my own dock. But I never thought they'd actually try to repossess my lake access. They picked the wrong guy. My name's Quinton Keller. I'm a general contractor with a bad knee, a good boat, and zero tolerance for power-hungry HOA clowns. I moved into Lakefield Shores 2 years ago for the peace and the fishing. The house came with private lake access and a beautiful easement that ran along the south shore of the water. It was the main reason I bought the place. Fast forward to last Thursday, I'm coming back from a job site, covered in sawdust and ready for a cold beer, when I see a bright orange sign staked at the top of the path to my dock. Private HOA access only. Trespassers will be fined. Standing there with a clipboard, arms crossed like she owned the planet, was Wanda Ashcroft, HOA board member, permanent scowl. Wears pearls to mow her lawn. I parked the truck and walked over. Wanda, what is this? She didn't even look up. You're no longer authorized to use this path. It's been reassigned to the community under our updated shoreline access policy. Updated what? Page 42 of the new HOA bylaws. As of last week, lake paths not registered with the county have reverted to association control for equitable neighborhood usage. I blinked. You mean you rewrote the rules and just took my easement? It was voted on, she said, flipping through her clipboard, 3-1. You should have attended the meeting. I was at work. That's not the HOA's responsibility. I laughed loudly. You can't just take my lake access, Wanda. That's private property. She raised an eyebrow. Then show us the deed. Otherwise, the association will be fencing off the area this weekend. That's when I knew they had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't say another word. I just turned, walked back to the house, and pulled the file box from the closet. There it was, right between the roof warranty and the septic inspection, my original purchase agreement. Not only was the lake access deeded to my lot, but the entire water easement from the old developer was in my name. The entire southern shoreline easement. The HOA had no claim. None. But I wasn't going to shove a piece of paper in Wanda's face. Not yet. I wanted them to go bigger. Bolder. Dig that hole nice and deep. So I waited. By Saturday morning, they'd brought in a post-hole digger and a landscaping crew from town. 3 guys in matching polos were unloading fence posts in front of my dock like they were building a playground. I stood on the porch with my coffee and watched them measure lines on my land. They hadn't even bothered to knock. The guy calling the shots was a tall, sunburned type with a clipboard and a Bluetooth headset. Not Wanda, this was someone new. He noticed me, raised a hand like we were neighbors borrowing sugar. Morning, he shouted. We'll be done before noon. I walked down the steps without a word. He didn't stop smiling. You the homeowner? He asked, glancing at his sheet. No, I'm the guy who's about to call the sheriff if you don't pack up. He chuckled. I've got a work order right here from the Lakefield Shores Association. Authorized installation. You're trespassing. I've got permits. No, you've got a piece of paper signed by a board that doesn't own this land. He held it out anyway. I didn't take it. Instead, I pointed to the wooden stake they'd driven into the dirt about 4 feet from my dock stairs. Pull that up, I said. Now. Sir, you see that orange tag on the tree? I asked. That's a county marker. You're standing on deeded private property. I suggest you confirm your work order before you finish building a lawsuit. He hesitated. Then one of the workers walked over, phone in hand. Boss, this says Keller's easement is filed under parcel 631. That's the whole southern run. Clipboard guy's smile disappeared. He made a call, mumbling into his headset, then waved a hand at the crew. Just like that, they started packing up. No apology, no explanation. Just loaded the posts back into the truck and peeled away like they hadn't just tried to seize land with a shovel. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Monday morning, I drove into work before dawn. When I came back, a red notice was taped to my front door. Violation of community easement usage, subject to fine of $300 per day. This time, it was signed by the HOA's legal compliance officer. A name I hadn't seen before, I called the number on the notice. A woman with a clipped voice answered. "This is Lorraine Wilkes with Legal Compliance." "Yeah, this is Quinton Keller. You left a threatening letter on my door." "That's a formal notice of violation, Mr. Keller. You've been using community access for personal storage and exclusive use." "Wrong again. That easement is in my deed." "You're going to want to review your file before this gets ugly." There was a pause. "We're aware of your claim," she said carefully. "But the association's position is that the original developer never properly filed the subdivision of rights, which invalidates private usage. You're not a court. You don't get to just declare my deed void. The board is prepared to escalate this if necessary." "I hope they do." I hung up. By Wednesday, they had a letter from a law firm in town landed in my mailbox. The HOA had hired outside counsel. They were filing for declaratory judgment to clarify the legal status of the shoreline easement and restore access to the broader community. It was a garbage move, legally weak, but enough to drag me into court. They were counting on me folding, on me being too busy or too broke to fight back. But I had two things they hadn't expected. First, I'd rebuilt every inch of my house with my own hands. I wasn't about to let a few suits with clipboards take what I'd earned. Second, my younger brother, Marcus, happened to be a real estate attorney with a specialty in land use law. I called him that night. "They're invoking what?" he asked, flipping through the scanned documents I'd emailed. "Some nonsense about subdivided usage rights expiring," he snorted. "They're bluffing. That easement's clean. Title was transferred with your property and recorded properly." "I'll draft a response. We'll hit them with a counterclaim for quiet title and throw in a tortious interference count while we're at it. Think they'll back down? Not if they've already spent money on an attorney, but we're not just going to win. We're going to make it hurt." By the following week, Marcus had filed a formal response and a motion for sanctions. He also subpoenaed every HOA meeting minute from the past 6 months. That's when we found the real gold. Tucked between budget notes and committee reports was a line item labeled Shoreline Redevelopment Initiative. They'd already signed a lease agreement with a private paddleboard company to put a rental kiosk where my dock stood. They hadn't just wanted access. They wanted to turn my property into a commercial revenue stream. That changed everything. We brought the lease agreement to the county zoning board. Turns out, the HOA had never filed for a commercial usage variance. Worse, the land in question was designated residential only. That lease wasn't just overreach, it was illegal. We turned the whole file over to the county district attorney. By Friday, things hit a boiling point. I came home from work to find a white sedan parked halfway across my driveway. Wanda was standing beside it, arms folded, watching two younger board members unload folding chairs from the trunk. "Afternoon," I said, stepping out of my truck. She didn't answer. One of the guys looked uncomfortable. "We're just setting up for a shoreline subcommittee review," he offered. "On my property," Wanda turned. "Until the court rules otherwise, we are treating this as communal space." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You're trespassing. You were warned." And last I checked, holding an unpermitted meeting on private land violates at least 3 local ordinances. "You're being uncooperative," she said flatly. "This could have been resolved quietly. Too late for quiet. The DA has your lease agreement. You signed a contract for land you don't own." "That's attempted fraud." Her face twitched. "That's a baseless accusation. You'll get to argue that in court, maybe bring a chair." She didn't respond, just tightened her jaw and walked back to the car. 2 days later, the fence posts reappeared this time, stacked in the bed of a code enforcement truck. The county had launched a full investigation into the HOA's zoning violations, financial dealings, and unfiled contracts. The paddleboard company pulled out of the lease entirely once they realized the association didn't legally control the shoreline. And then the letters started, not from the HOA but from other homeowners. Turns out I wasn't the only one they'd strong-armed. One couple had been fined for installing solar panels. Another had their backyard swing set removed while they were on vacation. The board had been operating like a private dictatorship for years. Most people were just too busy or intimidated to fight back. Now, they had a reason. I hosted a neighborhood meeting on my lawn. No permits. No HOA approval, just 30 chairs, a cooler of waters, and a stack of copied documents showing exactly how the board had overstepped. People listened. Nodded. Then they started talking. The best part, we had the votes. And at the next election, we used them. The election was scheduled for the second Tuesday in May, and by then, the neighborhood had changed. Not just in tone, but in posture. People who used to look over their shoulders before speaking now stood in small knots on their lawns, comparing notes and pulling out their phones to review photos, action notices, and recordings. A retired firefighter named Alden Riggs came forward with something explosive. Alden had been the HOA treasurer until he resigned last fall. Quiet guy, built like a wood stove, always wore those button-down shirts with the sleeves rolled up past the elbow. He showed up at my door one evening with a manila envelope and a look I hadn't seen since my days working demolition, part fury, part relief. "I've got something you need to see," he said, stepping inside. He set the envelope on my kitchen table and pulled out a stack of invoices, bank statements, and email printouts. Some of them were signed by Wanda. Others had Lorraine's name typed at the bottom. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Private disbursements. Unauthorized vendor payments." The board's been funneling HOA funds into a shell landscaping company since last summer. I only caught it when I noticed duplicate charges for the same service under different names. I leaned in. "Who's behind the company?" He tapped the top sheet. "Wanda's nephew, lives 2 counties over." Never seen him do a minute of work here. I stared at the paperwork, bile rising in my throat. How much? Just under $78,000, all recorded as beautification initiatives and shoreline enhancement. That explained the sudden obsession with my property. They weren't just trying to grab access, they were laundering money through a fake improvement project. I called Marcus that night. He drove up the next morning with a binder and a plan. We filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office and turned over every document Alden had provided. Within 72 hours, an investigator from the AG's Public Integrity Division reached out for a statement. The floodgates opened. Turns out, the HOA's corruption went deeper than anyone guessed. A second whistleblower came forward, Clara Nguyen, who had handled the community newsletter and email announcements. She revealed that the board had been selectively editing meeting summaries, removing any resident objections and padding the votes in favor to show consensus where none existed. She had the original drafts. We compiled everything into a master report and delivered it to both the county prosecutor's office and the state licensing board for nonprofit community associations. Then we waited. The election wasn't just a formality anymore, it was a reckoning. On the night of the vote, residents filed into the community center with more energy than I'd ever seen in that place. Folded arms, narrowed eyes, and a few lawn chairs in the back for folks who didn't trust the setup. I stood near the back with Alden, Marcus, and Clara. Wanda sat at the front table in her usual cream blazer, flanked by Lorraine and 2 others from the outgoing board. She looked tired, not apologetic, just cornered. The ballots were simple. 5 board positions, 11 candidates. I didn't run, I didn't have to. The neighborhood had raised up their own slate of replacements, people who didn't owe anyone favors and weren't afraid to dig through the mess. After the votes were counted and double-checked by 2 independent volunteers, the results were announced. All 5 incumbents were swept out. The new board took their seats that night. Wanda left without a word. Lorraine followed, clutching her briefcase like it might explode. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of victory. It was quiet, focused. The kind of silence that comes before a storm breaks in the other direction. 3 weeks later, the subpoenas landed. County investigators seized the HOA's financial records, hard drives, and archived emails. The landscaping company tied to Wanda's nephew was dissolved within days. The AG's office formally charged Wanda, Lorraine, and 2 other board members with misappropriation of funds, falsification of records, and conspiracy to commit fraud. They were arrested at their homes. Wanda's mugshot ran in the Sunday paper. Clara framed it. But the part that stuck with me most came later, after the dust settled. The new board invited me to a meeting not to scold, not to apologize, but to ask for help. They wanted to understand the easement boundaries, the property rights, and the legal limitations of HOA authority so they could rewrite the bylaws from scratch. I sat in on 3 sessions, walked them through the county plat records, and showed them exactly how the original developer had structured the shoreline rights. They listened. They took notes. And they passed a resolution to register every pre-existing access easement with the county's GIS system so no future board could ever try to reinterpret them again. The funniest part. The new president, a retired Army logistics officer named Bethany, offered to have the entire shoreline mapped, cleaned, and surveyed for free using a grant she'd secured from the watershed district. I told her she didn't need to do anything for me. Then I paused. "Well," I said, "maybe a little bench halfway down the path to the dock. Good place to sit with a beer." She smiled and made a note. The HOA didn't die, but it changed. It stopped being a tool of control and started becoming what it should have been all along, a group of neighbors trying to make things a little better, not a little wealthier. And the dock, still mine, still quiet, still the best fishing spot on the lake. Only now, when folks walk past, they wave. Not because they're trying to be polite, but because they know who held the line. And they know I'll do it again if I have to. It started with a sign. It ended with an arrest record and a rewritten charter. And every time I see someone paddle past in the early morning light, steering clear of the easement, I remember exactly what it took to keep that shoreline out of greedy hands. It was almost summer when the depositions began. The county had completed its audit of the HOA's finances and turned over the results to the district court. What they found went beyond mismanaged funds. It was a blueprint of corruption, phony invoices, off-the-books payments, and coordinated votes that violated both the HOA charter and state nonprofit governance laws. The shoreline lease was just the tip of the iceberg. Marcus and I were called in as witnesses. Not because we were victims, that part was obvious, but because we had the documentation that tracked the entire scheme from conception to attempted execution. The courthouse sat in the center of a brick plaza 2 towns over. On the morning of our testimony, we passed Wanda in the lobby. She was seated beside Lorraine, both of them flanked by their attorneys. Neither of them looked up. Lorraine held a thick folder in her lap, her nails tapping rhythmically against the edge like she was rehearsing. The assistant DA, a wiry man named Holloway with sharp features and a voice like sandpaper, met us outside the courtroom. "You brought the original property deed, correct?" he asked, already flipping through his notes. "And the GIS overlay, the easement plat, and the title transfer," Marcus replied, handing him a folder. "Good," Holloway said. "The fraud charge hinges on proving they knew they didn't control the shoreline when they signed that lease. If you can walk the court through how that easement was conveyed and why it legally excludes HOA authority, we'll have what we need." I nodded. "Let's end this." Inside the courtroom, the air was cool and still, not tense, just waiting. I was called first. "State your name for the record, Quinton Keller. What's your occupation?" "I'm a licensed general contractor, residential and small commercial." Holloway stood beside a projector screen displaying a satellite image of Lakefield shores. "Mr. Keller, can you please describe the portion of land marked in green?" "That's the southern shoreline easement. It was deeded to my property by the original developer. It's recorded with the county and reaffirmed in the title work when I purchased the home. And to be clear, does the HOA have any legal claim to that land?" "No." "Did you ever give them permission to use it?" "Not once." Did anyone from the HOA board inform you they intended to lease that easement to a commercial vendor? Only after I confronted them. By then, the lease had already been signed. The projector clicked to the next slide a copy of the lease agreement. Holloway tapped a section near the top. Is this signature familiar? It's Wanda Ashcroft's. And this one, Lorraine Wilkes. Holloway turned to the judge. The state contends that both defendants knowingly executed a commercial lease on land they did not own, without seeking legal confirmation or the homeowner's consent. We further contend that this act was not an isolated error, but part of a broader pattern of financial misconduct. The judge nodded. Proceed. Marcus took the stand next. His explanation of the easement's legal structure was methodical and airtight. He walked the court through the plat records, the property lines, and the chain of title like he was teaching a class. The defense objected twice, claiming speculative interpretation. Both objections were overruled. Then came the financials. A forensic accountant hired by the county laid out exactly how the HOA had rerouted funds through Wanda's nephew's fake landscaping company. The charges were disguised as shoreline beautification, tree trimming, and irrigation upgrades. In reality, no permits had been pulled and no work had been performed. The final nail came from Clara Nguyen, who testified that Lorraine had instructed her to alter meeting minutes to reflect unanimous votes that had never occurred. The judge recessed for deliberation. When she returned, she didn't waste time. The court finds sufficient evidence to charge Wanda Ashcroft and Lorraine Wilkes with misdemeanor misconduct in public office, felony fraud, and unlawful conversion of community funds. Bailiffs, take them into custody. They didn't protest. Lorraine folded her papers. Wanda adjusted her jacket and stood. That was the last time I saw either of them. Back in the neighborhood, things didn't just calm down, they reset. The new board held their first open planning session on the lawn behind the community center. No closed doors. No executive sessions. Just card tables, folding chairs, and big maps rolled out under the sun. The agenda was simple. Transparency, repairs, and rebuilding trust. Bethany, the new president, asked me to help oversee a shoreline stewardship committee. Not to police it, just to help residents understand their rights and responsibilities. I agreed with one condition: no more fences, no more signs, just people solving problems face to face. She nodded. That's the goal. The committee was mostly older folks, retirees, gardeners, a biology teacher named Ron who brought a birding guide to every meeting. We walked the shoreline every few weeks, picking up trash, documenting invasive plants, and keeping watch for erosion. It was simple work, peaceful. One Saturday, a teenage boy from 2 houses down approached me during our walk. He had a fishing rod in one hand and a tackle box in the other. "Is it okay if I use the dock?" he asked. I looked at the path: no trash, no trampled plants, no signs of misuse. "You clean up after yourself," he nodded. "Always." "Then go for it. Just don't leave worms in the sun." He smiled and jogged down the hill. That moment stuck with me more than the lawsuits or the courtroom drama, because that was the point. Not ownership, not leverage. Just the quiet freedom of using the land the way it was meant to be used. Later that summer, Bethany invited the whole neighborhood to a lakeside cookout. No one asked for permits. No one worried about citations. People brought folding tables, crockpots, and homemade signs pointing to the bathrooms. Someone even printed T-shirts that said, "Lakefield Shores now corruption-free." I grilled burgers next to Alden, who'd brought his own spatula with his initials carved into the handle. "You think they'll try it again?" he asked, flipping a patty. "Not with this crowd," I said, gesturing to the families eating under the string lights and the kids skipping rocks by the water. He nodded. "Feels different now." "It is." As the sun dipped below the trees and the lake turned to glass, I walked down to the dock. The bench was their now solid pine, stained dark with a brass plate that read, "For those who watched the line and held it." I sat. The water lapped gently against the posts. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called out long and low, Behind me, laughter and music drifted through the trees. There was nothing to defend anymore, no schemes to unravel, no papers to file, just the sound of peace settling in, and the shoreline untouched, unbothered, and finally, right where it belonged.